So I'm Matt Pontifex, and I'm an associate professor in the Department of Kinesiology at Michigan State University. And what I wanted to share was some of my experiences in navigating student apathy in a large enrollment online asynchronous environment. And ultimately, what I hope you take away from this talk is that amid the push for developing massive open online-like courses, we should carefully consider the audience for that course, as the high degree of conscientiousness and drive required for student success means that entry-level early career students who are new to the college experience may not have the skills yet to manage the expectations of these courses. And while these courses do increase student accessibility and flexibility, students of lower socioeconomic status may be disproportionately disadvantaged. So in comparison to other Big Ten institutions, we're incredibly fortunate at MSU to have a massive undergraduate enrollment in kinesiology, being among the top 5 most popular majors on campus. However, we have a crushing 81-to-1 student-to-faculty ratio, and that ratio gets even worse at the freshman and sophomore level when students are trying to gain access into this major. To address such constraints, large enrollment courses remain a staple of undergraduate education at many institutions. And while there's limitations for this style of course, over the past decade there's been a growing push for curricular shifts to incorporate student-focused approaches and foster higher-level understanding of material to address many of these traditional concerns. We also have to acknowledge the benefits inherent in this format, particularly at larger institutions where smaller course sections are often taught by graduate teaching assistants and adjuncts, which might allow a student to potentially never take a class taught by an actual faculty member. And drawing from models of socialization, we know that having a highly engaged, prominent authority figure can be particularly effective in socializing students into adopting new perspectives and conforming to new social norms with greater individual expectations. So these types of courses can be leveraged to help build and establish the culture of a program. One of the difficulties in teaching introductory courses in kinesiology is that students generally believe they already have a great deal of knowledge across a breadth of content areas. So whether as a result of their prior sport participation, rehabilitation from injury, who they follow on social media, or even what they learn from sports coverage on TV, students enter feeling like they already know this stuff. But the reality is that while some of the stuff the students know is in fact true, it's not typically true for the reasons that the students think it is. And even worse, some of their core foundational beliefs about kinesiology are often flat out wrong. The struggle then is in addressing those issues so that students can acquire a strong foundational knowledge in kinesiology on which to build from. The other difficulty is getting early career students to understand that this stuff matters. There's very few undergraduate majors where we have to acknowledge that there's a potential risk of death, a risk of injury, and a risk that if we don't approach things properly and know why something works, that students might go on to cause an individual to choose not to engage in health behaviors. So since I began at MSU, I've been teaching a large format introductory course in kinesiology that's grown from 120 students to now around 300 students, with around 70% of those students being in their first year at MSU. So twice a week students attend lecture with me, and at the end of the week students have small group laboratory discussion sections where they get a chance to gain hands-on exposure with concepts covered in lecture, discuss and debate relevant issues, and complete checks for understanding. And additionally, 2 to 3 times per week, we hold evening question and answer sessions, which are really just office hours that have been rebranded so students will choose to attend. And this course is like a highlight reel of kinesiology. We get to cover all of the best topics. So things like the cardiovascular system, EKG, skeletal structures, muscle structure and adaptations, obesity, aspects of epidemiology, physical activity recommendations, theories of behavioral change, sport engagement, issues in high school and collegiate sports, aggression, violence, and even how models of drug use inform on performance enhancers in sport. So if students don't find anything interesting in this class, kinesiology clearly is not for them. And ultimately, beyond addressing deficiencies in students' prior knowledge and emphasizing the importance of these topics, the goal of this course is for students to gain an understanding of the various methods, perspectives, theories, and how these concepts can be applied within subdisciplines of kinesiology. So that instead of taking information and forcing it to fit their beliefs, students can apply their knowledge in a meaningful way. But a common issue is that many of our students are smart enough that they never had to develop good academic skills in high school. They were able to be largely successful without ever actually learning how to study. So as an entry-level class, we put a lot of work into helping to properly scaffold students into this process of learning how to study and what to study, as well as acquiring an understanding that conscientiousness is important. They have to attend and stay engaged, or as one student posted on a course review, if you don't go to class, you won't pass. And over the course of the semester, we work to acclimate students into taking a greater level of ownership over their learning. We also work to address another common issue in that many of our students have never been asked to know anything more than just information. They've only ever had to just memorize a set of spoon-fed facts. But we ask them to not only obtain a basic understanding, so for instance obtaining an understanding of gas laws, the concept of ventilation and respiration, and the anatomical structures involved in these processes, But students also have to understand how these things fit together. So understanding the processes of inhalation and exhalation and how they work together with gas exchange. And then the part that really blows their minds is that we push them to start engaging more deeply with the material. So we can use a freshman level understanding of basic gas laws and these processes to explain how the American Heart Association's hands-only CPR is able to draw air in and out of the lungs. And in doing so, we help strengthen students' understanding of these basic concepts and also help develop their critical thinking skills. So when the pandemic necessitated the movement of classes to a virtual format, I wanted to retain the key foundation building aspects of the course, but also leverage some of the advantages of this online format. In particular, because we had almost 300 students in the course, we adopted an asynchronous format to allow greater flexibility as students were forced out of the dorms and had to return back to live and work with their families. So we utilized our course website, which already provided a framework for what was being covered each week, to be the central hub for students. So students could find the week and have links for the lecture, the notes, the readings, and assignments for that week. And lecture videos were subdivided into segments of about 20 minutes, with students being able to change the playback speed to speed them up, slow them down, and rewatch the lectures as needed. So the asynchronous format largely mirrored the regular in-person course format, with students watching lecture videos rather than attending lecture in person. They attended the question and answer sessions on Zoom rather than in person. And students still had the expectation that they'd do that independent studying. They'd develop those individual expectations. Checks for understanding, which are our small quizzes and assignments designed to incentivize students to regularly review their notes and begin thinking about the material in a higher level. So questions about what palpating the pulse provides a measure most similar to, or about how alpha-gamma coactivation maintains the sensitivity of the muscle spindle. And rather than students completing these in the laboratory and discussion sections, they instead completed these within the D2L learning management system. However, because we had concerns about the ability to similarly replicate the hands-on and interactive nature of our laboratory and discussion section without running into the dreaded ghost Zoom situation, we instead integrated as much of the content as we could into our lecture videos and redirected our resources towards student support by increasing the number of question and answer sessions so that we were offering 6 90-minute sessions a week for students to be able to drop in on, and taking a highly proactive approach for contacting students and following up with those students who we identified as struggling in the course. The difficulty, though, is just because the material is available for students to learn from doesn't mean that they'll actually engage with it. When classes are in person, certainly students don't always regularly attend, but they've been preconditioned through years of schooling to view it as the expectations. Students will show up even if they hate the class, the instructor, or the content. There's a strong social pressure that they attend class. Their friends tease them when they miss class. When students talk with their parents or academic advising staff, they ask if the students have been regularly attending class. At least if you're in the classroom, we have the ability as instructors to engage with the student. They can be reminded about things. As the instructor, we can use nonverbal cues to determine if students are getting it or are struggling, and we can provide additional support. But one of the issues we ran into this past fall was that in an online asynchronous environment, the student has to choose to watch the lecture. The production quality of the lectures could be amazing. The lectures could be the most entertaining things ever, but the student wouldn't know unless they actually access it. And if a student is identified as not engaging or struggling with the material, it can be exceptionally difficult to get them back on track in this asynchronous environment. We know that some students don't regularly check their emails. They don't read their messages or announcements in the learning management system. And that's assuming they even log into the learning management system on a regular basis to begin with. So a student who doesn't have the sufficient conscientiousness and drive to engage with the lectures, who doesn't engage through the learning management system, is likely to be left behind. And in the spring 2020 semester, we had the ability to provide students with a little over a third of a semester worth of scaffolding. So when the pandemic necessitated moving online, these students had already established some of the habits necessary for student success and had been socialized into a culture of having these higher level of expectations. And following the move to asynchronous, over 80% of our students watched all of the lecture videos that were covered on an exam. Contrast that with the 40% of students in the fall 2020 semester, which were completed entirely online. For the fall 2020 semester, to try and provide some of this scaffolding, we created a lecture video on how to use different study strategies to study for college-level exams, but 70% of our students chose to skip that video. Data from our course management system indicated that 60% of our students didn't even bother to view the study guide before they went and took the exam. And 15% of our students chose not to take a quiz that explained how exam questions would be formatted and provided several example questions that were actually on the exam. And when you compare exam performance, our spring 2020 semester that had about a third of the semester in person did fairly well on exams after they moved online. Whereas if we look at those students in the fall 2020 semester who skipped an entire topic of lecture, so for instance, an exam over the cardiovascular, the respiratory, and the skeletal systems, these students only watched lectures for the cardiovascular and the respiratory. And unsurprisingly, if you skip an entire section of a topic, so would be the equivalent of a week's worth of classes in person, it didn't go well for these students. And we dealt with a lot of students, and in some cases students with their parents, who just couldn't believe they did so poorly. Yet in the vast majority of these cases, it was clear that the student had taken an approach where they had chosen to not engage with a substantial portion of the lecture material, whereas those students who watched at least one lecture for each of the topics on the exam exhibited far greater levels of performance on those exams. And ultimately, these data are consistent with findings from analysis of massive open online courses, which have observed exceptionally low completion rates, with success in the MOOC being more strongly associated with motivation level of the student and their level of prior knowledge on the course material. Students who already know the material are most likely to complete the course. So if a student already has these foundational skills, conscientiousness, and drive, they can apply them within the asynchronous environment. Whereas some entry-level early career students new to the college expectations may not be adequately prepared to do so. Now, obviously, I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the potential impact of the pandemic on student performance. And while students in both the spring and fall 2020 semesters experience this, for our fall 2020 semester, as part of a larger research project, we assessed this using a number of measures. So we used the coronavirus anxiety scale to examine students' anxiety associated with the coronavirus. And while we certainly saw that some students exhibited high levels of anxiety, there was no relationship between coronavirus anxiety and performance on the exams. We also used the Taylor COVID stress scales to assess mental health related concerns associated with COVID-19, and similarly found no relationship between overall COVID related mental health concerns and exam performance. So while student concerns about the pandemic didn't relate to their course performance, we did find that the extent to which they were actually impacted in their personal or family life by the virus was negatively related to exam performance. But this effect was fully mediated by socioeconomic status. So the epidemic had a greater impact on students of lower socioeconomic status, who then exhibited poorer exam performance. Yet when students have typically completed this course in person, we regularly fail to observe any association between socioeconomic status and performance on the exams or in the course more generally. However, even prior to the pandemic, evidence from massive open online courses using both IP address, geolocation, and mailing addresses indicate that both enrollment and completion rates are substantially higher in areas with higher socioeconomic status. So taken together, it would appear that large format asynchronous online courses don't sufficiently scaffold students to ensure student success regardless of their socioeconomic status, at least not to the same extent that we can accomplish with in-person classes. So collectively, as we move on from this pandemic, my takeaway is that while these large format asynchronous online courses have the potential to increase student accessibility and the flexibility of administration, careful consideration should be given to the appropriateness of using this course format for courses with high enrollment of entry-level early career students who may not necessarily have the skills necessary for success. If not, we may actually undermine our student success initiatives.